Good afternoon. The webinar will begin shortly. First, a few housekeeping matters. Participants have been muted for this webinar. If you have technical issues, please use the chat box to send a message to the organizer so we may try to assist. A handout of the compilation of ranked choice voting resources and model practices is provided in the control panel in the Handouts tab. To expand or minimize the control panel, click the orange left or right arrow. If you have a question or comment regarding the webinar, please type that message in the question or chat box. Alternatively, you may email your questions or comments to info@rankedchoicevoting.org. To keep this webinar to about 35 minutes, and out of respect for your time, we will not hold a question and answer session at the end of this webinar. Rather, we will gather the questions we receive and compile answers in a single document to email to all participants within a few days of this session. And with that, please welcome Gary Bartlett, our team leader, to begin the webinar.
Our Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center consulting team welcomes you to our inaugural webinar. Strides have been made gathering resources and information about ranked choice voting for election officials, candidates, political parties, advocates, and interested public. Our work has led to the development of the Ranked Choice Voting Center website, www.rankedchoicevoting.org, and a resource document titled Compilation of Ranked Choice Voting Resources and Model Practices. Today we will share a high-level overview of our work and share excerpts from the compilation. But first, let me introduce you to our team members who have hands-on experience administering ranked choice voting elections and are ready to provide research, education, training, and marketing. The team services are free, including travel. In the order we will be presenting today, I am Gary Bartlett and served 20 years as Executive Director of the State Board of Elections in North Carolina. I have served on several boards and commissions, including a board member of the Election Center. I am part of the initial group that started the SARA program for national training of election officials through the Election Center and Auburn University. Beverly York began her career in elections administration 10 years ago as a North Carolina District Election Technician and Deputy Director of the Wayne County Board of Elections. Ramon Montoya has spent the past 16 years in election administration for the City of Albuquerque, the City of Rio Rancho, and Bernalillo County, New Mexico. George Gilbert is a SARA graduate. He served as Director of Elections in Guilford County, North Carolina for 25 years. Connie Smith is also a SARA graduate, has served as Elections Commissioner in Johnston County, Kansas for 9 years. She owns an election consulting business and has provided consulting services to numerous local, state, and federal election agencies, including the U.S. Assistance Commission. Karen Brinson Bell elections career spans more than 10 years, including Elections Director for Transylvania County, North Carolina, and the State Board of Elections Voting Systems Division. Chris Hughes is Fair Vote staff attorney who focuses on ranked choice voting at the local and state levels with an eye towards national implementation. He is our liaison to Fair Vote. The table of contents on this slide lists topics covered in the compilation of the ranked choice voting resources and model practices. Our goal today is to introduce many of these topics and also how the compilation is configured. First, it's important to know that compilation is a living document. Updates and new information will be added on a regular basis. Please take a few moments to view the topics outlined in the current table of contents. Another key aspect of this compilation design An example, the voting equipment section will soon have new material regarding ranked choice voting options for new voting equipment and legacy voting equipment. Each report topic has an introduction or a summary with links you can click on to access for more information. To give you an example, we work together with the League of Women Voters, Maine, Fair Vote, and David Carey to develop concept papers for ranked choice voting implementation for Maine. As you can see, there are 3 papers: security and transparency, recounts, audits, and you can click on either of these links for additional information. I would now like to turn it over to Beverly York, who will now share some of the benefits of ranked choice voting.
Thank you, Gary. The benefits of ranked choice voting and also why jurisdictions adopt this method of voting. Jurisdictions adopting ranked choice voting do so for a number of reasons, from saving money to increasing civility in campaigns. Let's take a look at some of the benefits from the perspective of voters, candidates, election officials, and military and overseas voters. For voters, with ranked choice voting, voters can rank as many candidates as they want in order of preference. If an earlier choice is eliminated, ranked choice voting ensures their preference continues to count for their next choice. Too often, candidates win elections to offices such as mayor despite being opposed by most voters. With ranked choice voting, if no candidate has more than half the vote in first choices, candidates finishing last are eliminated round by round in an instant runoff until 2 candidates are left. The winning candidate will be the one with majority support when matched against the other. And all of this is accomplished without the voter having to return to the polls again to vote. For candidates, the spoiler effect occurs when a third candidate appears to have drawn first choice votes away from one candidate in a closely contested race. Ranked choice voting allows more than 2 candidates to compete without fear of splitting the vote by allowing the voters' full range of preferences to be reflected in the final outcome. Candidates may conduct a more civil campaign where they may be more encouraged to debate the issues and appeal to a broader spectrum of voters. This generates inclusive leadership because the candidates must appeal to voters who might initially vote for someone else, but may select that candidate as another ranking. Candidates can benefit from cooperation rather than division, especially in multi-winner contests. The cost of campaigning may be reduced because candidates only have to campaign for one election. So candidates may realize benefits of ranked choice voting while at the same time reducing the cost to run a campaign. For election officials, in some jurisdictions without ranked choice voting, if no candidate has a majority of the votes after a primary election is held, then a second election takes place in which only the 2 candidates with the most support in the first election run. Whether the runoff takes place before, as in a primary, or after Election Day, turnout often plummets in the second round, even though election officials must use virtually the same amount of resources and funds as in the primary or the election. Ranked choice voting can save the jurisdiction a lot of money, the entire cost of a second election, while helping promote majority support and civil campaigning. This has been the motivation for the adoption of ranked choice voting in cities like San Francisco, where they use it to replace runoff elections, and in Minneapolis, where it replaces primaries. Election officials oftentimes have to contend with the question of whether or not to include runoff elections in the next fiscal year's budget. By implementing ranked choice voting, election officials can more accurately plan for the coming year's expenses and budget items. For military and overseas voters, one example of the benefits of using ranked choice voting is to ensure military and overseas voters can fully participate in the electoral process. Election officials are challenged with sending and receiving of ballots multiple times, once for the first election and then for the second. Relying on international mail takes time, and may mean the deployed military and overseas voters may not have time to receive, complete, and return a runoff ballot before the day of the election. With ranked choice voting, a military or overseas voter can vote in the first round and then rank their backup candidates. If a runoff occurs, the ranked ballot is counted for whichever candidate in the runoff the overseas voter ranked highest. As of 2016, 5 states have used ranked choice ballots for this very reason: Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and South Carolina. Our next topic, ranked choice voting terminology, will be presented by Roman Montoya.
Thanks, Beverly. And I'm here to talk to you today about some of the terms used in describing ranked choice voting. Well, first off, we have instant runoff, then preference voting, single transferable vote, choice voting, and historically, the most commonly used term, preferential voting. Now, you may be saying to yourself, I've heard of one or more of these terms. Well, now we're going to make it easier by just using one umbrella term that covers all these other similar terms, and that's ranked choice voting. And the reason why we use this term is because it's centered around the voter. So you may be asking yourself, what exactly is ranked choice voting? Well, simply defined, it's an election method allowing each voter to rank contest options in order of the voter's preference. When talking about ranked choice voting, two of the most common methods used are single winner and multi-winner elections. A single winner election is just what it sounds like. It allows for only one single winner, such as a mayor or a governor, whereas a multi-winner election is different as it allows for multiple winners to be chosen, such as we see in some city council or state legislatures where more than one individual is elected at large. Then there are other terms that we have to do with the very important development of ballot layout and design. The most common ways of designing a ballot for ranked choice voting are by columns, a grid style, and a list style. Examples of these styles will be shown in more detail a little later on in the presentation. Now that we talked about ballot design, I'd like to talk about the next step, and that would be the tabulation of the ranked choice voting ballots. There are different methods available when counting the RCV ballots. There is an internal tabulation process where the counting of the ranked ballots takes place within the voting system. There are also third-party applications which require the voting machine to export all of the cast vote records and then use that data with an outside application to complete the counting process. Well, all these terms and methods that I've spoken about are on our website, which can be found at rankedchoicevoting.org. Now when you're looking at our RCV website, you'll have a better understanding of what the terminology being used means. Now I'm going to pass you off to George, and he's going to talk to you about the different types of ranked choice voting elections.
Thank you, Roman. This is George Gilbert, and my role today is to introduce you to two types of RCV elections that Roman mentioned. These include the single winner contest and the multi-winner contest. Single winner contests are most appropriate for executive office contests, such as mayor, governor, president, etc. This is often referred to commonly as instant runoff voting. RCV is particularly effective when there are numerous candidates vying for a single executive seat or where one faction's votes are split between two or more candidates. Rather than only voting for one candidate, candidates are ranked according to the voter's preference. That is, first choice, second choice, third choice, and so forth. On election night, the top choices are counted first. If there is no majority winner, a series of tabulation rounds is executed where the lowest vote getter is eliminated and that candidate's ballots are counted for their next choice. In effect, a voter's ballot does not simply die when his or her first choice is defeated. While counting may stop when one candidate receives a majority of votes, a better gauge of community support is obtained when rounds are counted until only two candidates remain. The next slide outlines multi-winner contests and introduces proportional representation. Multi-winner contests are a preferred option for electing a legislative body, such as a city council, a state legislature, or even U.S. House of Representatives. The great advantage of multi-winner RCV is that it ensures a diversity of winners. It assures both majority support and fair minority representation without resorting to single-member districts. As with a single winner RCV, the voters rank their candidates and the top choices are counted first. But in a multi-winner contest, the next step is to calculate a threshold of election according to the formula: the total votes cast divided by the number of seats plus one, and then one more vote. For example, with a 9-member Cambridge, Massachusetts council, if there were 9,000 votes cast, the threshold for election would be 9,000 divided by 10 plus one vote. This works out to just over 10% of the vote. That's the percent that 9 candidates can achieve, but 10 cannot. Candidates that reach the threshold are declared elected, and any additional votes that would accrue to them are counted for the next choice candidates. Now, being elected with 10% of the vote may not sound like majority support, but consider if there were one majority winner for each of 9 single-member districts, each representative would have been elected with a very small percentage of the total vote. Say each district has 1,000 voters and each winner gets 50% plus one. Each would get elected with only 501 votes, or just 5% plus one of the vote total. For more detailed information on multi-winner tabulation options, you can follow the links that are provided in this slide and in the compilation document, which are both attached to this presentation. In conclusion, multi-winner RCV is an alternative to highly gerrymandered districts or typical at-large elections in which a majority can control all the seats. It assures that any substantial like-minded group can win representation roughly in proportion to its share of the vote in the represented jurisdiction. Now I will pass you on to Connie Schmidt to explain in more detail how RCV works.
Thank you, George. On this slide that you're seeing now, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you mark a ranked choice voting ballot. And it's really as easy as 1, 2, 3. Each voter is given an opportunity to select their first choice, their second choice, and their third choice for each race that appears on their ballot. In the example on this slide, the choices are flavors of ice cream. Your second choice is only going to count if your first choice selection has been eliminated. And the same thing applies to the third choice. It's counted only if your first 2 choices are eliminated. And it's just really that simple. The next slide that you'll see is going to show a little overview of the tabulation process for single winner ranked choice voting. The tabulation begins with a counting of all of the first choices on every ballot that's been cast. And remember, only one choice on each ballot is counted. If a candidate receives more than 50% of the votes, the counting then may stop and that candidate may be declared the winner. If no candidate receives more than 50% of the votes, then the counting continues by eliminating the candidate that received the fewest number of votes and then counting the second choice on each one of those ballots until a candidate receives over 50% of the votes. If your first choice candidate loses, your ballot remains alive and continues to be counted for the second and or the third choice until a winner is finally declared. Again, only one choice per ballot is counted. Now, multi-winner races are very similar but have smaller thresholds to be elected. And again, you can learn more about how ranked choice ballots are counted on our website. Now I'm going to turn you back to Karen, and she's going to talk about ballot design and usability.
Thanks, Connie. Last year, the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center and FairVote partnered with the Center for Civic Design to research best practices for ranked choice voting ballots and instructions, voter education, and election results. The center wrapped up the first phase of the research in December, producing an 87-page report that provides principles and guidelines for designing ranked choice voting ballots, voter education, and results presentation, drawing from materials already in use in the United States and creating prototypes that were refined based upon input from voters in California, New Jersey, and Minneapolis who participated in the study. On our website and in the compilation, we provide links to the report and supporting documents. Of particular emphasis in the current report is the ballot design. The study evaluated 4 paper ballot layouts: limited ranking, grid style, which is depicted, repeated blocks, and hand-entered, and also digital ballots in 2-list and single-list style. Interestingly, the study found that, quote, with all the ballots using the same design basics, many of the differences between different ranked choice layouts became less critical, allowing voters to focus on making effective choices for ranking, end quote. We encourage you to read the study in depth and also stay tuned for an upcoming webinar devoted solely to the findings and recommendations of the study. This is also just the starting point, as the next phase of the usability study will explore multi-winner contests, testing of ballots that have both RCV and non-RCV contests on the same ballot, and optimal ballot design for optical scan and digital ballots. Reports and collaborations have been a big part of our work to date as we try to provide documentation of best practices and share perspectives for others to learn and draw from. I'm going to turn you over to Chris Hughes now to share some of the historical and legislative work we have gathered.
Thanks, Karen. So like Karen said, I'll start today with a little bit of history, and then I'll move to the legal context. Ranked choice voting was invented in Europe in the 1850s by Thomas Hare, a British barrister, and Carl Andre, a Danish mathematician. It was first used in the United States in Ashtabula, Ohio City Council elections in 1915. Ranked choice voting was eventually adopted for use in 24 U.S. cities, all of which used the multi-winner form for their city councils and or school boards. One of those cities was Worcester, Massachusetts, whose 1955 city council ballot is pictured on this slide. By 1962, however, all cities but Cambridge, Massachusetts had abandoned ranked choice voting for a variety of reasons. Some adopted lever voting equipment, making ranked choice voting impossible. In others, political bosses discovered that they could not control election outcomes as they could in non-ranked choice voting elections, and got ranked choice voting repealed. Cambridge, however, has continued throughout to use ranked choice voting for its city council and school board elections. Interest in ranked choice voting began a resurgence in the late 1990s and early 2000s, starting in San Francisco. Ranked choice voting was first used there in 2004 and is now used in 10 cities across the country. Another 6 cities have passed ranked choice voting laws but have not yet implemented RCV, generally due to the limitations of their voting systems. Despite such limitations, RCV was used statewide in North Carolina in 2010 for a judicial vacancy election. This was the first statewide RCV use since the 1930s, and will be covered in more detail by Gary in just a few minutes. A citizen initiative passed in Maine in 2016, becoming the first statewide adoption for general elections, including single winner ranked choice voting for governor, state senate, state house, U.S. House, and U.S. Senate, beginning in 2018. The Maine Supreme Judicial Court recently issued an advisory opinion stating that the use of RCVs for governor, state senate, and state house races is unconstitutional under Maine's constitution. This opinion is not binding, however, and it is unclear what the ramifications of this decision will be. Single winner ranked choice voting also passed in Benton County, Oregon for its countywide offices, so 2016 was a big year for RCV. And thus far in 2017, 19 state legislatures have seen ranked choice voting legislation introduced. Finally, ranked choice voting has been used in a number of foreign countries, including Australia, Ireland, and Malta for some time. This history demonstrates that ranked choice voting is not just an experimental voting method. Next, legal considerations. Cities, counties, and states have different considerations for legal questions related to RCV. Some states allow cities and counties to define their own election methods, while others require them to have state-level authorization. Charter cities tend to have more flexibility than non-charter cities in this realm. Statutory ballot design specifications, laws on election tabulation, and other state-level election laws can hamper ranked choice voting adoption efforts and need to be considered when looking at state-level reform. Similarly, state voting system certification requirements play a large role today in defining a jurisdiction's options for implementing ranked choice voting. One safeguard we recommend for addressing this latter point is for jurisdictions to include ranked choice voting specifications in their requests for proposals and requests for information. This helps future-proof your voting system and places on the vendor the burden of negotiating any state certification requirements. Some state constitutions contain detailed election provisions that have emerged and been interpreted strictly within the plurality winner tradition, as was recently seen in Maine. In some states, election officials have taken the position that voting methods not specifically authorized in the state's constitution or in state statutes may not be implemented until such authorization is provided. To assist in addressing some of these issues, our compilation report and website include model statutes as well as sample statutes from jurisdictions where RCV has been enacted. We also provide model RFP and RFI language in single sentence, single paragraph, and more detailed 2-page forms. Further, we are available to give guidance on legal questions you may have, as well as to help with formulating an RCV requiring RFP. Please contact us using info@rankedchoicevoting.org for help. Now to Gary Bartlett to give more insight on North Carolina's ranked choice voting experience.
Thank you, Chris. North Carolina began its ranked choice voting experience by conducting pilot municipal elections in 2007 and 2009. Exit polls conducted by North Carolina State University in 2007 surveyed more than 2,400 voters. 95% in Cary and 86% in Hendersonville said ranking candidates was easy to understand. More than 60% of voters in both municipalities ranked additional candidates. When asked, do you prefer ranking candidates, 68% said yes in Cary and 67% said yes in Hendersonville. Our next ranked choice voting elections came in 2010 to fill appellate judicial vacancies. 3 were district offices and 1 was a statewide Court of Appeals office. A new law prompted the vacancies to be filled through ranked choice voting because of the short window of time before the general election. There were only 86 days from the effective date of the vacancy to Election Day. We prepared and administered the new voting method across 100 counties in North Carolina for a voting population exceeding 6 million at the time. It was the first statewide ranked choice voting election in the United States since the 1930s, and our success story is testament to what others are capable of doing. Let me share what we did. There were no budgeted funds on the state or county levels separate from those allocated for the normal general election. We encouraged election officials to provide leadership and a can-do attitude. We followed election laws and procedures already in place, adding only necessary procedures for ranked choice voting and tabulation. Openness was key. We invited observation and review by interested public of all ranked choice voting documents, presentations, meetings, including tabulation processes and recounts. For education, we focused on our county election officials through train-the-trainer sessions. There were 8 regional sites and 1 statewide training session. Then, for voter education, a ranked choice voting instructional page was added to our existing judicial guide that was mailed to every North Carolina household. Our cost was only $200. We received a grant for public service announcements and utilized free media and public presentations. Our most effective communication to the voter was providing written and verbal instructions when the voter presented themselves to vote. Voters could rank up to 3 choices. The top 2 candidates advanced. All offices, traditional and ranked choice voting were placed on the same ballot. The first round was counted and unofficial results were announced on election night. For transparency, observation, and this being a first-time process, the second and third choices were combined and counted after the normal canvass day. In tabulating ranked choice voting results, and because our voting equipment was not automated, procedures were put in place to tabulate ranked choice voting results. Counties were given 2 days for additional rounds of counting, though all but 2 or 3 finished in 1 day. Our optical scan voting equipment counties had election officials do a manual sort of the remaining ballots of the second and third choices, and then they were processed through the tabulator. The first choice vote totals were added to the second and third choice votes to for a final total for each candidate. Our electronic direct record touchscreen counties used an automated process. They used an algorithm totaling the second and third ranked choices and then totaled those with the first choice votes. A limited scope audit of the first round of the Court of Appeals election night results was conducted as part of our canvass. There were no issues at the completion to address. The State Board of Elections ordered a standalone ranked choice voting canvass and later a recount as allowed by state law. There were no election protests, no letters of complaint filed with the State Board of Elections. The ranked choice voting elections were successful and worked as planned. We share this experience so that other states have a model and can realize that ranked choice voting implementation is not a daunting challenge, but simply an election administration process like any other. Now I'd like to turn it over to Karen Brinson-Bell, who now will present model and best ranked choice voting practices.
Thanks, Gary. A major objective of our work and the resulting website and compilation is to provide a repository of model and best practices. We have gathered materials, documents, videos, and more from RCV jurisdictions to give new jurisdictions a one-stop location to find information. We have folders set up by location in the Where Is It Used section of the website. Additionally, we have been developing model practices, concept papers, and documents, including sample ballot designs and suggested audit procedures for the main implementation, and also recommendations for voting equipment and tabulation configurations for consideration in places such as Utah. These efforts have led our team to be called upon for testimony to legislative bodies or give guidance on implementation for newly adopted jurisdictions. This aspect of our work will continue to evolve and be shared on the website and in the compilation. Beverly will now highlight some of the other next steps that are planned.
Thank you, Karen. Some of the next steps for the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center include the compilation document, which is one component of the collection of ranked choice voting resources for voters, election administrators, policymakers, and candidates that will continue to expand. Next in the webinar series will be the ABCs of ranked choice voting, where participants will learn more about why jurisdictions have adopted ranked choice voting, and election officials will learn more about administering an RCV election, including tips on voter and community outreach techniques. That seminar will be led by team member Connie Schmidt, and it will be presented during the month of June. In addition, topics that will be presented in future webinars include usability study and ballot design, and ranked choice voting and voting systems and equipment. I'd like to remind you, as stated earlier, that questions for this webinar may be submitted using the info@rankedchoicevoting.org email address, and responses will be emailed to participants shortly after the conclusion of this webinar. We appreciate having you join us today during our inaugural webinar, and we certainly look forward to having you join us for upcoming topics. Thank you, and have a good day.